Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend and fellow coach, Cory Hardman. Cory and I met through the nervous system resilience training course that we took with Leah Davidson. And Cory has as I got to know Cory through that course, I realized that she has some life and professional experience that I think will be really valuable for my listeners. And I'm really excited for this conversation that we're about to have. So Cory Hardman is a certified life coach through the Life Coach School and has advanced training in nervous system resilience. She specializes in working with teens and young adults who struggle with anxiety. She's passionate about helping them live the life they want to, but aren't able to because of their personal struggles. She also offers stress management training for leaders and loves helping reduce stress and anxiety in the workplace. She has her own story of chronic illness, burnout, and healing herself. All three of her children have anxiety to varying degrees. She has personal experience with concussions after her husband and son each received one in separate incidents. All of this experience gives her a unique perspective as a patient, a caregiver, and a professional. She's combined all of this experience to create her amazing program to help teens and young adults with anxiety. So thanks for being here, Cory. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us more about you. What's your background and how did you end up getting into coaching specifically around anxiety?
Yeah. So all of my kids have anxiety, and my husband experienced more anxiety after his concussion. So I have had a front row seat to watching loved ones struggle with pretty significant anxiety for well over 15 years. So I didn't really understand that much about it, though, in the beginning. My daughter cried every single day when she was in first grade, and nobody could figure out why. And even the school counselor, nobody could figure out why she would cry. And it was every day at lunch. And so we just didn't know. So it took us several years to actually figure out that it was anxiety. But now I know that anxiety manifests itself in so many different ways, and even different ages of kids, it shows up different ways. So I originally just really started learning more about anxiety to help my own kids, but that's not why I became a life coach that specializes in anxiety. I had always, isn't that funny? I'd always had the desire to go into some kind of a helping professional role, but I never pursued it. Mm-hmm. But one day I was at church and I had the strongest impression that I needed to become a life coach and help teens and young adults with anxiety. And Bethany, if I'm being honest, I really didn't like the idea of being even more surrounded by people who had anxiety because I was surrounded by it at home. So it took me some time to really just figure out if that's what I was supposed to do. And after a few weeks, I knew that was exactly what I was supposed to do. And that decision has really been one of the best decisions that I've ever made, because I never struggled with anxiety personally. I mean, of course, I felt it like we all have, but I've never had it every day of my life. So I didn't understand it the way that I didn't really understand what my kids were going through. But becoming a life coach who specializes in anxiety has helped me understand anxiety at such a deeper level. I've been able to connect with my kids from a different place than I was before. And it's opened up so many conversations with them that would never have happened if I wasn't trying to be a better coach, right? And so it's really opened doors for me as a mom and opened doors for me professionally, just being surrounded by so many people who have anxiety every day. Like, I know initially I was like, oh, I can't do this. And I don't know that I want to, but I absolutely love it. It's been such a blessing being surrounded by people with anxiety. I've learned so much from them.
Well, that's so cool. So how old were your kids when you did the life coach school?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. So
were they teens?
Right. Yeah. So they were all teens and young adults.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was very much geared to the people that were in your life, even though
yes,
at the same time. Super interesting. So thanks for sharing that. And I am hoping to get you back on here to speak specifically about anxiety more, because that is something that a lot of people with concussions deal with. And as you know, but for this episode, we're going to be focusing more on your experience as a spouse and a parent of people who've had concussions. So I'm excited to hear this. So yeah, two different people in your life, in your family, have experienced concussions, your husband and your son. And I really am so grateful that you're willing to share this experience and perspective, because that spouse and parent viewpoint is one that I don't think gets talked about a whole lot and is very significant. A concussion affects the whole family, and especially those significant relationships. So I think your story will be really beneficial for others who are in similar roles right now. So thank you again for being willing to be open and vulnerable about this. I know it's not easy. So thank you for this. And thank your husband and your son too. So let's start chronologically. Who had their concussion first, and what was that experience like?
So my husband got his concussion first. It was in July of 2016. He got hit in the mouth with a piece of wood, and it was apparently moving at the speed that surprised onlookers. Like, everybody was really surprised. Nobody could figure out how the piece of wood could have possibly traveled that fast and hit him that hard the way that it happened. So it was definitely something that could never be recreated. It was a freak accident.
What was he doing?
He was on trek with our youth group, and he was taking his tent down at the time, just folding it up. And the boys were throwing wood into like a corralled off area. And there was beveled, I think they were like metal beveled fence posts that it was kind of corralled in. And the boys were just chucking wood just randomly, and it hit the corner post and shifted directions and just went and hit him in the face. So it was crazy that the boys throwing it could hit it and have it ricochet off. They were like, there's no way that it should have come with that much force, but it happened.
Oh man. Oh, poor guy. Okay. Sorry.
No. So they were in Wyoming. So they were about 5 hours away from home. Luckily, he hadn't drove, so he got a ride home. And when he got home, I took him to the ER. They did the CT scan, and we were told everything looked great. Like, they called it a mild concussion and said to take it easy for a few days, that after that, he would be totally fine to go to work and just really do whatever that he wanted to do, go back to normal life. At the time, he was working required overtime at his job. And so he was working about 50 to 60 hour work weeks. And it was a job that required him to be on the computer all day long. So the doctors didn't see a problem with that. They were like, nope, within a few days, you'll be fine to go back to work. But I noticed that he really wasn't going to be fine, like the doctor said, after a few days. There was no improvement at all, and he was actually getting worse because being at work that long and on the computer was just really aggravating everything. And so, but we didn't really know what was happening or what to do about it, since the doctor said it would be fine. We just were kind of like, maybe if we wait a little bit longer, it'll get better, because that's what we were told.
Wait it out. Yep. When it first happened, did he feel concussed? Like, was it a thing for him right away? Did he know, or did it take some time for it to manifest itself fully?
That's a good question, because by the time he got home, I just felt like he was a little out of it. So it had been several hours. I think initially he got really mad. Like, it was just like anger that came out of him initially. And then he had actually gone to Trek. He was the videographer for them. And so he was editing videos the entire way home in the car.
Gosh. Oh God. Brain and car at the same time.
What not to do, like ours is right. And so, but when I saw him, like when he walked in, you could just see that his eyes were just glazed over. Like, he just looked really out of it. And I could tell that he wasn't quite right. And so, so I'm not sure if it was like right away that he knew, but I know that my son was like, yeah, something's not quite right with dad. You better take him in.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. So then he went straight to work and it was a few days and you guys were like, we might not be getting better as fast as we thought we would be.
Yeah. I mean, he just took a few days off, like, the weekend and went back to work the next week.
Mm. Oh man. Okay. All right. So I don't know if you want to tell me more about what the experience was like right now, or I would be very interested in hearing what your prior knowledge of concussions was before this point.
Yeah, I mean, really up to this point, we knew a couple of people who had concussions. We knew a couple of people who had kids with concussions, but not really a lot of details about it. We just knew that it had happened.
Did you know, had they had long-lasting concussion symptoms, or were theirs like resolved within a few days?
Kind of both, actually. So my good friend had gotten a concussion, but she didn't really seem like it was a big deal. Once in a while, she would tell me things about it, so I knew it was still a problem for her, but I had no idea the extent that she was really going through. But it later became our personal experience that people with concussions don't like to talk about and share what's going on with them. And so it was after the concussion, we started going to people like, what was your experience? Who did you go to? And that's kind of when people started opening up a little bit. But I still feel like, I don't know, we held back a lot of what was going on. And I feel like the people we talked to held back a little bit as well.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. And I think that is a very common thing to have happen. So what changes did you notice in your husband, and how quickly did you notice them?
Yeah. So the first thing that we really noticed was the terrible headaches. He had headaches with no relief. Like, it didn't matter what he took or how often he took it. He just had no relief from them at all. But he would keep trying, and he would keep taking the same medicine and combining medicines and new medicines just out of sheer desperation to get relief. Even though it was never different, he never got relief, but he was always like, this time might be different. And so that was really hard for him, was the headaches. He was really sensitive to light. He couldn't tolerate the blinds being open. He couldn't tolerate the lights being turned on. He really struggled to find words too, to simple, like, everyday objects. I remember one time he was having a conversation with somebody, and he couldn't find the word flashlight. So he described it. So he's like, that thing that you hold and you push the button and the light comes on and you can see in the dark. And my son was with him and he's like, do you mean a flashlight, Dad? And he's like, yeah, that's it. So things like that happened. Yeah, things like that happened all the time, where he couldn't find the word, or he would use the wrong word. So the word wouldn't even come close to meaning what it was supposed to or what he thought it meant, but he didn't realize that. Sometimes he did, but most of the time he didn't. He would just throw words in there and we're like, what is he even talking about? He had no filter. So like, if he had a thought come to his mind, it just came out. Like, he didn't know when he shouldn't say things. And he really struggled to portray any emotions that he was feeling. So things would come out sounding like he would sound really angry or really frustrated or condescending, but he didn't feel that way at all. But that's the way that it came out. So he still struggles with that actually a little bit, is to have his tone of voice and stuff match what he feels. But on the flip side of that, he had a hard time reading other people. So he would have a hard time reading our emotions. So he would think that people were mad at him or that they were being aggressive when they weren't. So he would it left him feeling super defensive because he felt attacked most of the time, even though there was no reason for it. Like, people were not mad and angry at him, but that was his perception. And then with that, he had like way slower response times and processing speed than he did before the concussion. So it'd take him longer to answer questions or to work out a problem that he was trying to solve or finding words. Like, everything was just a little bit slower. And one big thing that I noticed was that he couldn't make even like the simplest decisions. So he would get really mad if I would push him and ask him, like, help me decide. And it was worse if there was like two choices. So if there was two good decisions or two like possible outcomes, it was even harder for him to make that decision. So it'd be simple, like, do you want ham or turkey on your sandwich? And he would just be like, I don't care. And, or like, hey, do you want to go do this today or do you want to wait until tomorrow? He just refused to make any decisions at all. So it left me making every decision for him, both big and small. The other things I noticed were like, he couldn't regulate his mood. So he would be really, really happy one minute and like super angry the next. And then it'd be totally fine. And it would happen like just like that. So it'd be seconds or minutes. And I was like, we just went through this full range of emotions from one scale to the other. And he just acted like nothing happened. Like he didn't even realize that he had so many emotions going on at the same time. And then, yeah, is that crazy? But I think
it isn't like it is very, very common, very typical, but it is crazy for the people watching it happen. Like, wait, what is going on here?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So he would just be like one extreme to the next and pretty all over the place. But the one thing that really, I think was probably the most challenging, maybe not short term, but kind of overall, is it really worsened his depression significantly. So, and the longer his symptoms persisted and the more frustrated he got, then the worse that his depression got. Because he knew he wasn't fully functioning, but he couldn't do anything about it to change it. So I felt like it almost broke him. Like it just, the depression really, really settled in the longer that all of these symptoms went on, because he recognized he wasn't right, and it was just like that kind of no hope that things were going to change after so long.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And thank you for sharing all of those things, because those are so very, very common for people to deal with following concussion. And again, doesn't get talked about a lot. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. And the point you made about the decision making made me think about a book that I've been listening to called The Ghost in My Brain. I don't know if you've read that or heard that, but it's fascinating and really insightful. But this professor he's a professor of, I think he teaches artificial intelligence. Anyway, he experiences a concussion and post-concussion syndrome. And he talks about there was a day, and he lived by himself, but he was hungry. So he went to make himself some food, and he got out salami and an apple, and he could not make a decision. And it was like, he just absolutely could not make it. It wasn't and he would like tell himself, like berate himself, like, come on, just choose something. He couldn't do it. He eventually gave up, put it back in the fridge. And it was like 2 or 3 days before he finally called someone and was like, can you just tell me salami or apple? And the guy was like, sure, have your salami first and then eat your apple. And it was solved. Like it just, that decision-making part of the brain just is not functional. And so it really, yeah, it's fascinating and super, it can be debilitating, right? And I, again, appreciate your perspective, because that, as the caregiver or as the spouse, then you're like, oh, now all of the decisions are being left to me. Like, and that's a perspective that I hadn't really considered, so
right. Yeah. I mean, it was extremely frustrating because it was the simple things like, well, I don't know what you want to eat. Tell me. Now I understand like he wasn't capable, but at the time, like everything was so new. Like all these symptoms were new. We had no idea. And I was like, what do you mean? You like, what do you want? And then, like you said, all the decisions, like it was everything, that big and small. And so it was really frustrating on my part because I didn't understand it.
Yeah. Yes. The understanding piece, like changes everything. If we know what we're dealing with, then it changes. Yeah. You can have so much more compassion and so much less frustration, I think. So again, grateful that you're sharing this. So, and this kind of goes along this next question here. How did these changes impact your relationship? I guess you shared some of that already, like you had to make decisions on your own, but anything else that you want to share?
Oh, there's so much to that. So our marriage really up to that point had been almost perfect. We were like completely united in everything we did. We made every decision together. We were there for each other in every aspect. And we rarely really went anywhere without each other, just because we love spending time together. Like we were the couple that like would go to the store together just to spend time together. Or, the doctors would laugh like, oh, you're on your date again at the doctor. And I was like, it's just because we want to spend time together. Like we just could not, we couldn't envision our life without each other. It was just, we were part of everything that we did.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's so sweet. I love that.
Yeah. And, before the concussion, I had really been experiencing some pretty debilitating chronic illness. They finally sent me to Mayo Clinic to get some answers. And it had just been 8 months before the concussion that I had been to Mayo Clinic. So he became like, he was just really protective over me because he had helped me do literally everything. Like I couldn't drive that far or that often because I was part of my illnesses, I was passing out. So obviously I didn't want to pass out in the car. So he took me grocery shopping. He took me to run errands. He took the kids everywhere they needed to go. He basically just helped me do everything because I needed the help. But, then the concussion came. And I vividly remember one day I just really wasn't feeling good. But we desperately needed to go to the store. So I asked him if he felt up to going, and he told me no. And then he asked me, but when you go, don't forget this. And that was really a turning point when I realized that something was really not right. Because it was the first time that I had went to the store and gone shopping by myself in over a year. And he was home sleeping, worrying about what I was going to forget, right? Like, don't forget this. So I realized that things were not only as bad as I thought, but probably worse than I thought. Because I went from having to have a caregiver to being the caregiver just overnight. And I could still barely take care of myself. And then I got thrown into the role of caregiver. And, like we talked about, I had to make every single decision, both big and small, both important and unimportant, for him, for me, for our kids, for our family as a whole. Like we were having car problems and things like that. Like it was just left for me. And because of the marriage that we had before, it was really this night and day shift, because we went from every decision together to everything was put on my plate. It was like I had lost him in certain aspects. And then I kind of had to take that role of his mom instead of his wife at certain times too, because part of that, the symptoms is he was just really selfish and really childlike a lot of the times. I would have to make him go lay down and be like, you need to go take a nap, or tell him you need to quit fighting with the kids, or you can't talk to me that way, or that's not acceptable. Things that he would tell a child. So I was I went from his wife to feeling like his mom, which was really hard because I didn't want to be his mom, but somebody needed to be.
Did he respond okay to you telling him stuff like that? Did he take it and listen?
Sometimes, most of the time it would create, he would get mad and then he would just go to sleep. And that would kind of be my ultimate goal, but I didn't like the way that it played out. I was like, you obviously need to go lay down and I need you to quit fighting with the kids. But so the only way to do that would just be you need to take a nap or quit fighting. Then he would get mad and he would go and sleep. So the goal was to get him to quit and to lay down, but I didn't like the way that it had happened, right? The way that it happened. And honestly, Bethany, if he wasn't at work, he was usually sleeping or fighting with the kids. But when he wasn't sleeping, there was times I just secretly wished that he would, because it was so challenging in our relationship together, because he was so moody and angry. He got mad over everything. And at this point, we had been married for 20 years. And it was really the first time that he had ever treated me that way, or been mean to me, or condescending to me. It was a first for our relationship. That's not how we were. And so I just was I don't even recognize him anymore. I don't recognize this man. This is not my husband. I don't even know who you are anymore. And so that was really, really hard. And it was kind of after seeing all these changes and stuff in our relationship, I was really at the point where it's we need some extra help. We can't, we can't keep going on this path that we're on. That I just kind of knew things weren't ever going to improve on the path that we were on. And deciding we needed help was really easy, but finding someone who could help was not easy at all.
So how long was it? Was this lasting before you realized that, or made that decision?
It was a couple of weeks after his original concussion that I was like, hey, this is not what they explained. This isn't what we signed up for. So we need to get some extra help. But it took a few more weeks after that to find somebody to go to and actually get an appointment to go in, because everybody that had had a concussion that I knew, that I had talked to, couldn't tell me where to go either. His primary care doctor couldn't tell me where to go. The people that had had the concussions were like, we went here, but we didn't get the help we needed, so we wouldn't suggest that. And So it was really just the experience of like Googling, like who can help, like concussion stuff. And we finally found somebody that didn't necessarily, they weren't like a concussion clinic or anything, but supposedly could help. And so it was 5 weeks after the initial concussion that we finally got an appointment and got in. And at that point, they changed his diagnosis from mild concussion to traumatic brain injury, which felt way more fitting for what we were experiencing.
Well, it was interesting because a concussion is technically a mild traumatic brain injury. Like that is what it is, but it sounds like they didn't tell you that.
Yeah, no.
And I think that's a point that I was thinking as you were talking before, like this was probably, it sounds like this night and day shift and so hard emotionally and in every way, but especially because you had no preparation for, like, you weren't told that this was a possibility. You weren't told, you were told, hey, he'll be better in a few days. And then you had to figure it out. Like, oh, actually, maybe that's not accurate. Like,
right.
My heart breaks. It's so, and to the point that you made too, that he was sleeping all the time. Fatigue is also a very, very common symptom of concussion that, again, people may not know about. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Anyway, sorry. Okay. So this concussion thing that you found that was about 5 weeks out.
Right. So they changed his diagnosis to the traumatic brain injury. They got him on FMLA, and then he was able to start working. Like, they've had him down for half days, but he could also work just a few hours or not at all. So the most that he would work was a half day at that point.
Had he been working the whole time?
He had been working that 50 to 60 hours a week for those 5 weeks. So
holy cow!
The first 5 weeks were just awful.
I can't. I'm amazed that he did
that. I know. Well, and I look at that and I often wonder, like, is that what made him so much worse, or would he have been that bad no matter what? Like, I've always wondered, like, did that kind of set it in and kind of like seal the fate, or?
And that's it. Yeah, I don't know. Those kinds of questions are ones that are like unanswerable at this point. Although I do think that ideally taking it easy might have been helpful for him.
Right. It would not have hurt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but and then the doctor gave him like a few prescriptions, which helped him sleep at night, because he was sleeping a lot, but he wasn't getting good sleep. Yeah. And so that helped him sleep better at night. And it did help a little bit. It helped with the headaches. He still had them, but nothing like he did. And it did ease the depression just a little bit. And then the doctor's like, let's order some neuropsychological testing. And so we went through the testing, and when the results came back, I cried. So they said there was absolutely nothing wrong with him, that none of his symptoms were from his concussion. And I knew that couldn't be right, because he was completely different person after the concussion than before. Yeah. But at that point, I was like, hey, this professional is telling us it's not from the concussion. So I really lost all hope at that point that anybody could help, because if the specialist was saying he's fine, it's not from the concussion, I don't know what your problem is, these symptoms have to be from something else, then I knew that nobody else could help us, or at least that's the way I felt.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that spiraled him into a deeper depression, hearing you're fine, like this is not from your concussion, this has got to be from something else. So he was like, well, clearly I'm not fine, and clearly I'm broken and totally hopeless. So then he kind of spiraled down into a deeper depression, which created like more sleeping. He started pulling away even more than he had before. Everybody was on eggshells in the house because we were trying to like keep the peace, and I had to be the mediator in that relationship between him and the kids, and him and anyone he talked to, because he would really say those hurtful things because there was no filter. And his, like I said, his emotional tone of voice and everything was so off that he was just really hurtful unintentionally. Mm-hmm. So, and then if we went anywhere and he talked to anybody, he could fake it, man. He could fake it like he was fine, as long as it was short conversations. I could tell, but nobody else could tell.
Interesting.
He would come home, like his eyes would be completely like glazed over and just completely fried, where he had nothing left to give.
I was going to say that probably took everything out of him.
Yes, absolutely. Because he was like trying to pretend like he was fine. And then trying to find the words and have the conversation was really cognitively challenging for him. Yeah. So then he would be more confused, he would be more angry, he would be more discouraged because how hard it was for him to have a simple conversation. So he would sleep really for hours after having, a 10 or 15 minute conversation with somebody. So you can imagine, like, in our relationship, how little I was actually talking to him because I knew how much of a struggle it was for him to talk. And so I didn't want to use that, like what he had to give. I wanted him to save that for work or social. So
did he pull back? That's another thing that happens a lot, is people just really pull back from social engagement. Sounds like that might
Yeah, he did for sure, because he knew, and it would be like, hey, we want to go here. And he's like, well, it's going to be too hard for me to go. So I'd try and have him stay home, but he didn't want to stay home. So there was kind of that balance that our whole family missed out on a lot of things because we didn't want to push him to go in that. And then, so since I kind of quit talking to him too, because it was hard for him, then it really went from me having him for everything to having nobody to talk to. Because I was trying to protect him. So I didn't want to tell other people what was going on with him. But I was also trying to protect myself and trying to protect my kids from him. And so it was just really, really hard in our marriage, for our family life, like in our relationship, because nobody outside of our house really knew what was going on. Some people knew a little bit, but I never shared all of the details or the extent that it was happening, because I didn't want anybody to think less of him, because I was protecting him. I didn't want them to know that about him.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that sounds so very lonely.
It was.
Yeah. And not being able to talk to people about it, or feeling like you couldn't. How long did this last? And when you got that report done, what happened next? How did you guys move forward from that? Sounds like it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really was. It was really discouraging, and it took a while to kind of like pick myself back up and feel like there's got to be something more, right? So, and kind of within all of this time frame, he had lost his mom, and so we were dealing with all of the extra emotions of that, and trying to just filter through everything. And so I kind of really started pushing the doctor, like, you've got to do more because he is not functioning. And so they ended up.
Your primary care doctor, or the place?
The concussion. Yeah, the concussion doctor. And so they sent him out to like occupational therapy and speech therapy at that point to try and get some extra help there.
Mm-hmm. And did that make a difference? Did you feel like that was helpful for him, or did he feel like it was helpful?
Yeah, so it was the dead of winter by this point, and we live in Utah. And so we were driving about 45 minutes from our house in the winter after he went to work, because remember, at this point, I still am not driving that far. And so he's driving after work with a concussion at night in the winter to therapy, but they were doing back-to-backs a lot of days. So they would do an hour of speech therapy, an hour of occupational therapy, and he would be completely fried. And then we would drive home.
Oh my God.
So it was helpful, but it was also a big stretch. And so at a certain point, I was like, we cannot keep doing this anymore, because we saw improvements, but then it felt kind of stagnant. And so the benefits were not worth the risks of us driving. And so it was helpful, but under the circumstances, they were like, there's nobody closer to you. Like, this is the closest place you can go for these, because this occupational therapist and speech therapist understand concussions, but nobody by you does, which hindsight, like, I don't really believe that. There was nobody closer. They just didn't know of anyone.
Maybe not in their network.
Right. Yeah. Not in their selected ones.
Yes. Oh man. This is bringing up another point that I think is very important to just, again, get out there. Is everyone finding doctors, finding clinics, finding people can be so hard, especially, with an understanding that really understand concussions, but also the life situation that you're in can make even going to the appointments really challenging. And that's something that I hear a lot from patients who come to the clinic that I work at, is where they're getting speech and OT and PT and neuromuscular therapies and like all these things in one clinic. Like, they don't have to remember where, like, all of that executive functioning that's required for the planning and the driving and the everything, like,
Yep.
that's because those are significant barriers to getting the help that you need. And depending on life situations like that, like, it can make it impossible. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a huge strain on our whole family because I wasn't feeling well, but I was having to go anyway. And he wasn't capable of driving us, but he was. And it was just a big strain because we were going to different appointments and so far away from home. And it just really was a struggle to try and keep up with that.
Yeah. So how long did you end up doing that for?
I know we did it for at least a couple of months, but I'm not quite sure exactly how long it was.
And at that point, when you stopped doing that, was there anything else that you tried? Like or was it just like, okay, we're not going to do that and we'll just live with this?
He tried to keep up on a lot of the exercises that they had given him. And so he was trying to do that. And, with the speech therapist, they taught us a lot of like word games and things like that we were trying to incorporate as a family. But as far as professional help at that point, we were just kind of financially and physically spent, like mentally exhausted. And there was nowhere else that we even knew to go. Like that was kind of like, well, these are your options, take it or leave it. And it just was like, okay, well, we're going to leave it at this point because it's not worth it. So, and he did have a convergence insufficiency from a concussion as well. So they wanted to add vision therapy on top of that was even further away from our house. And so we bypassed that, and the occupational therapist helped do what she could do to help with that. But that was pretty much the extent of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. It's breaking my heart. Man. So how long ago was that at this point? Like, and how did things play out after that?
Yeah, so that would have been within 6 to 7 months after his concussion that we kind of quit all therapy and trying to really do anything. We kept going to the doctor because he was prescribing medication and kind of altering some of that for the depression and the headaches and stuff. But that was really the only thing that we did. And we kept up with that doctor for several years before we quit going to him.
Yeah. And did things just kind of settle into a new routine? Like were there any other, did he make any other progress or have any other setbacks along the way?
Yeah, there was kind of like, well, he just kind of felt like he was just stagnant for a long time. Like I would say like a year, just kind of stagnant. And then we would find a little something that would help. And then it would help for a little bit. And then he would be stagnant again. And then little things that would help again, and then be stagnant. And so it was just kind of this, I wouldn't even say a roller coaster. I would say like this flat line with little teeny bumps that we would go over, like a little teeny bit of helps, but nothing really like significantly better until more recently.
And I'm just curious with the little bumps, would he stay up at that higher level, even a little bit higher, or would he come back down to baseline?
It would depend. It would depend on what it was. So some of the things like that he found was like meditation. And as long as he was meditating every day, I could see the improvement. But as soon as he stopped, then the improvement would all go out the door. So it's kind of like if he was using it, it would be good. But it's really hard with a concussion to be consistent with things like that. So that would be the mom role again of like, okay, you need to go do your meditating. Okay, like.
Yes. Oh man. Yeah. I think we'll get to hear more about what eventually did do some help. But in the meantime, is there any advice that you would offer to spouses who are trying to navigate these changes and challenges in their loved ones?
Oh, yeah. So, I did the best that I could at the time, especially since I was struggling with my own health stuff. But I felt like a single mom with a stranger living with us. Like I pulled away from him and everyone around me. He pulled away from everyone. And really, we just tried to do it all on our own. And I had never felt so alone in my entire life. I spent a lot of time crying over what I had lost with my marriage, my best friend. And I just really tried to come to terms that my marriage would never be the same. It was so lonely and so like such a discouraging place to be. And on top of all of that, like I felt so ashamed of all the thoughts that I was having about him and about our relationship and about our family. And so obviously I would not recommend the way that I handled it to anyone. So I do have some advice, and that would really be to do the opposite. It would be to get help yourself as the caregiver. Because I needed someone to talk to. Like, I needed somebody to support me and to validate what I was feeling and what our family is experiencing. Like, I needed somebody to be like, I'm so sorry, and understand what was happening, but I didn't have anybody. So I know personally how hard it is to share with people because you're trying to protect your loved one that has the concussion. So if you don't have anybody you want to share with, I would recommend opening up to a professional. So that could be like a life coach, a counselor, or even somebody else who has gone through it would be great to connect with. But I would suggest like building a support team for yourself. And if you have kids, they need support just as much as you do. Because like my kids lost their dad. I was so focused in the fact that I had lost my husband, but they all lost their dad in the relationship that they had with them. And so build that support system and then take time to just get away and fill your own tank and take care of yourself, because as caregivers, we get burned out so easy. And we know that we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anyone else. But I think like the biggest thing is like the advice, or I guess the message would be like, know that there's hope. Because I didn't have hope because I didn't have the resources and I was told he would be fine. I have learned so much about concussions now, and how concussions affect the nervous system and how it dysregulates the nervous system. And I just would shout the message from the rooftops to not give up. Like, don't give up on seeing improvement, even years after the injury, because we're 7 years into this and we're still seeing improvement. So there is that message of hope in all of this too, because there is tools out there. It's just that I didn't have them and couldn't find them when I needed them.
Oh, amen to all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is such an important perspective. And I love that you brought in getting support for the kids as well, because that is a relationship that has changed too, that it's an adjustment for everybody. And so, and I know there are support groups as well. I think every state has their own brain injury association or brain injury, something, alliance, something. They have different names, but there is support out there, and it is a brain injury. So you can look that up. If it's not under concussion support group, like look for something else. But there is hope, and there is support out there. So get that. And I'm curious, you mentioned the shame that you felt about all of the thoughts that you were having, which again, I think are totally understandable. But when you're trying to deal with everything and so depleted yourself, and then you're like upset at yourself for being upset about the things that are happening, like, and now that you're a life coach, any perspective or thoughts on that you would want to share with people?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely, like, if I could say one thing, it would be like, allow yourself to feel all the feelings. Allow yourself to be mad. Like, there's a lot of anger and a lot of hurt that comes into that. Like, allow yourself to be hurt over the things that are said. Allow yourself to be mad that happened in the first place. Allow yourself to feel like the guilt and the shame and all of that comes, because there's so many emotions that come up with it. Like, allow yourself to feel it. Because what I didn't realize at the time was the more you push away and try not to feel those feelings, like the more they persist. And so it just built inside of me, and I just felt more and more and more shame instead of allowing myself to feel it and to actually process it, because we need to normalize that. We need to normalize that those feelings are part of the process. Like it's part of the journey, is to feel all of those feelings along the way.
Yes. Amen. And that reminds me of a podcast episode I just did recently with David Morgan. He talks about emotional resilience. And that's one of his big points, is let yourself feel whatever feelings come up. And they won't last forever too. I think if we, like you were saying, if we resist it, then it persists longer. But if we allow it to wash over us, to process through it, like that's how we stay afloat. That's how we maintain and move through and pass things. And the point you said about if you're feeling ashamed of the feelings that you're having, then that shame just drives more hiding and secrecy and not sharing, and then builds on itself. So that's a negative cycle we want to avoid as much as possible. Right. So get the help you need, feel the feelings you need to feel, and know that there is hope. So those are very, very good lessons to share. So thank you. So, and I guess, and maybe you've already touched on a lot of this, but I'll throw this out there. What have you learned from this experience with your husband? And what would you say to yourself if you could go back in time and give yourself advice early on?
We have learned so many lessons. I'm going to tell you that. Like one big thing is I'm like, we're just resilient as a family. Like our family is so strong. One thing that I did learn is that we really need other people to connect with and to share our experiences with. I've learned that there's always hope, even when it doesn't feel like it, to never give up on the people you love, including yourself. Because I think that's a big one. Like I just felt like giving up myself. So if I could go back and give myself advice, that's a good question. I think I would tell myself, like, I'm stronger than I think I am, and not to worry about getting through it, because not only am I going to get through it, but I'm going to thrive. I'm going to make so many improvements on the way and on the journey. And I'm going to be grateful for the person that it helped me to become on this side of it. And just really like trust my inner voice, that I know my husband better than anyone else, no matter what the doctor said. I knew what was best for him. I knew what was best for our family. And really just never quit learning anything that I can. The searching for tools is like, that will not be wasted. Any time that I spend learning would not be wasted. And then really just surround myself with people that I can connect with and to make sure to take care of me, because I got left out. I didn't take care of me, and I needed to be taken care of. Remember, I needed the caregiver. I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I physically survived those years, because I was so sick. And then on top of that, dealing with all of like being the caregiver and emotionally, like just all the emotional distress that we went through affected my health as well.
Oh, I bet. Yes. Oh my gosh. That's beautiful advice. And I think really important, because when you're at the beginning of it, you don't know how long it's going to last. It just feels like this huge, unknown, scary future. Like what is going to happen here? And so I love that perspective now of it's going to be okay. Like, and it's not only going to be okay, you're going to thrive through this, even though it doesn't feel like that, even though you don't know. So that message of hope to your past self, I think, is really important. And I hope that anybody who's dealing with this right now at the beginning stages can take hope in that. So thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, because when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like there's ever going to be something that you look back on and can gain from. Like it just all looks dark and lonely and hopeless. And so I know it doesn't feel that way, but I promise on the other side, like there's always something that can be taken away from something like that.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Thank you. Let's shift gears, I guess, a little bit here. I'm just wanting to make sure that we do talk. I don't remember if later on in my questions, if I ask about what was effective. Should we talk about that before we move on?
Yeah. We have it later on. It's okay.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's shift gears for a second. And what happened with your son's concussion? Yeah. And how far apart were they?
So my son got his concussion in May of 2020. Okay. So it was 4 years after my husband's concussion. And my son was 20 at the time, but still living at home. And I remember the day, I still feel like there's trauma in my body from that day. So it was the morning of my daughter's COVID graduation. So if you can call it a graduation, right? And his concussion was really interesting because, and this is where the trauma comes in, is he was so excited that my daughter was graduating. He jumped out of bed and ran up the stairs and made it about halfway. And he had a seizure on the stairs. And so he was halfway up our flight of stairs to the basement, and he fell straight back, stiff as a board, and landed on his head.
Oh my gosh. Did you see it then?
My daughter did. But I heard it and ran immediately to it. But my daughter watched it happen. And she, like, even to this day, if we hear something that sounds similar to him falling down the stairs, I can instantly feel my body get activated. I got to him right after he landed, and he was still in the seizure, like stiff and tightened up. So yeah, it's something I'm working through still. And that's been 3 years now. But so that's where the interesting part came in, because we were trying to discern what was from the seizure and what was from the concussion. He initially, like, he woke up and he was really confused. He was totally out of it. And he was telling me things that were really scaring me, that were really off the wall. But given the way he was acting, I totally believed him. So we went to the ER, and the first thing I did was have them drug test him because he was acting so erratic.
Really?
And tripping out. And I was later told that it was because of the seizure. And I had never experienced seizures before or been around anybody. So I didn't even know that that's what had happened. And so I was told it was from the seizure, that everything he said during that time, I could not trust or believe any of it, which made me feel so much better because I was like, oh, well, I had him drug tested because I felt so bad. But here we are at the ER again. And they said, oh, you have a mild concussion. Just take it easy for a few days and you're going to be fine. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm. All too familiar.
So you can imagine at this point, I'm just totally thought spiraling. And I just could not even believe that this was happening again. So we brought him home, left him home while we went to my daughter's graduation. And within a few hours, the effects of the seizure was kind of clearing. He was kind of becoming coming out of that. And I started seeing the effects of the concussion showing. So he was really irritable, really self-centered, really angry, demanding, wouldn't make a decision. Here we are again. And he was just totally unaware of anyone around him and how anything that he did, any of his actions affected anyone but himself. Mm-hmm. So I was just instantly taken back 4 years in time. I was devastated to know that this so-called mild concussion, what it could turn into and how it could completely turn our life upside down. Wow. Because it was just all so familiar. So here we are again, and I did things a little different. So we ended up getting him on FMLA to get him off work and kind of recover. But that was all left to me. Once again, I was left doing all the correspondence between his employer and the doctor. I was making sure that FMLA paperwork was right because he was not really capable of handling or dealing with any of it. Yep. So it was those weeks after turned into some of the longest, because, he was home all day because he didn't have work. So it turned into some of the longest days of me being a mother ever. Oh. It was really, really hard parenting an adult child because he was 20 with all of these concussion symptoms. It was pretty challenging. But luckily, his story and my husband's aren't quite the same. So most of his symptoms eventually went away. And after a few months, I felt like he was mostly himself again. Mm-hmm. Minus we talked about this a little bit, anxiety is really triggered by concussions. And like many other people, his anxiety got significantly worse after the concussion. It didn't help that it was May of 2020. And so we were living in the pandemic for the first time. And that by itself created anxiety. Yeah. So, but it makes total sense, with everything that we know about the nervous system, that concussions create more anxiety naturally. It's just one of the side effects. It's the way that it works. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm so happy to hear that his did seem to resolve. That's and probably a huge relief, since you were probably just envisioning, like you said, oh no, we're starting this over again, and seeing another future of the same thing. So that's fantastic that he was getting better. And how was your experience as a caregiver, similar or different between the two experiences with the concussions? And what learning did you take from the first one that was helpful for the second one? Oh, yeah. Well, and as far as their symptoms, a lot of the similarities, short term, were all the same, anger, moodiness, headaches, self-centered, selfish. They slept a lot, personality changes, could make decisions, all of that, inability to read other people's emotions, and that. Long term, there was some differences in symptoms. They both have emotional and nervous system dysregulation still. My son's got the severe anxiety from it, and my husband still has a few cognitive challenges that are lingering, but mostly the challenge is his ongoing depression from that. So those were kind of the similarities and differences in the symptoms. As far as being a caregiver, it was really hard when my son got his concussion because my husband was still in the middle of his symptoms. So I'm really ashamed that I was more worried about how I was going to get through it with my son than I was worried about him recovering. Because at this point, I was just in survival mode.
Yeah.
I was still in survival mode for my husband's concussion. And then here we go again. But
don't be ashamed of that, by the way. Just throwing that out there. There's no shame needed. Shame is never needed.
Right. I know. I'm like, now I'm fine with it. And then I totally wasn't. And then like my son would self-isolate a lot more than my husband. So as a caregiver, I had kind of more time away from him, but it was easy, it was easier to be like, go lay down than it was for my husband. It was harder to have distance for my husband than it was my son. But going into my son's, I had a little more experience at this point. And so I really trusted myself more. I got him on FMLA right away. I got him time off work, and I created more of an environment for healing than I did with my husband because I just didn't know any better. And I tried to step away a little more often, even though it was COVID and it was a little harder to find places to step away to. But just even being outside and stepping away that way was beneficial for me. And a big difference was being able to, I just was more patient with my son and more understanding, because I started to understand that his behavior wasn't a choice, that it was just biology. With my husband, I didn't understand that. For a long time, I just had my feelings hurt over and over again because I thought he didn't care about me anymore. And it really wasn't the truth, but I didn't know any different. And so going into my son's, I felt more educated. And so I was able to be a lot more compassionate and a lot more patient to be able to let him be mean and say those things and just not get upset, which made me it made me a better mom and better mom to all of my kids too, because I wasn't so grumpy all the time, just stomping around like everybody's taking advantage of me and nobody likes me. And so it was kind of more like I had shifted. And so as a caregiver, it just kind of naturally was it was different and easier because of the things that I had learned before.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I am grateful that you're sharing that wisdom and hard-earned experience with other people who may be able to hear that and be like, okay, I see what's happening here. So that's really helpful. So I've had lots of caregivers ask what they can do to best support their loved one who's going through a concussion experience. And I'm curious of what would you say some of the best ways that someone can support their loved one through this would be?
Yeah. I mean, really allowing yourself to find the forgiveness in the actions that they're doing and the way they're treating you is huge. Because I learned that, like we said, it's not really a choice of the actions and even their like inability to make a decision and stuff. Like having that foundation of understanding is huge to be able to know that they're not just trying to be difficult. They're not just, being angry and being mean to you for no reason. So that is huge, knowing and understanding that. And because when you know that, then you can have more compassion to what they're experiencing. And because there was a lot of times I was more focused on what I was going through than on what my husband was going through, because I was right in the middle of it. I couldn't step back and see the big picture. But, I said it and I'm going to say it again. The best advice is really going to be to get support for you first. Make sure that you're taken care of and allow yourself to feel all of those feelings, because feeling all of those feelings is a healthy way. Like it means you're functioning properly. It means that like your brain and your body is working the way it's supposed to, because those feelings are going to come up. And so it's just allowing those and really having compassion on yourself when you do feel those feelings, or when you do need to take a break. Just allow yourself, like, be compassionate, because you're going through it just as much as they are. And I might be a little biased because I've only been the caregiver. I've never had a concussion, but I really think that the caregiver has it worse, because sometimes, or many times, they're left picking up the pieces everywhere they turn. They have to take care of everything. They have to make every decision. And if it's a spouse, all of a sudden you're doing everything both of you did. And if you have kids, you're now the mom and the dad. You're both. And so it's just really having that compassion on yourself and allowing all of it to be, and not judging yourself for the way you're handling it, the way you're feeling, the way you're reacting. Like, just allow that and have compassion.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's something, because I've talked to a lot of people, both the patients or the concussion victims and the caregivers. And it's really fascinating because the person who's going through the concussion doesn't always, like, what people need varies from moment to moment and within themselves, but also different people need more help in different areas or whatever. And sometimes they just want to be left alone. Sometimes they just want someone to be there and not say anything. Sometimes they need someone to tell them to take a nap or tell them to eat the salami first, right? Like, it just, they don't, and so as the caregiver, I love your point about just, if you're taking care of you, then you are going to be in such a better position to have that compassion for them. Because as hard as it is for you there, they probably, to whatever degree they're aware of it, they're probably being really hard on themselves because they see that it's hard for you too, right? Like, it's just this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where the depression, that's where the depression really spiraled too, is because he could see the way I was handling it and he was feeling frustrated. And so it's just this endless cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if you're taking care of yourself, then you're going to be in a better position to, again, have that compassion and be more in tune to whatever inspiration you might get about, like, what that person needs at that point, or just to leave them alone and just go take care of yourself. Like, it's important. So thank you for bringing that up. So what tools have you found that have been helpful for your concussed loved ones? And clinics, programs, devices, nervous system tools were helpful.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, we had done the occupational speech therapy, which we saw some benefit from that. I would recommend doing that again. I think if we would have been able to push through it and add physical therapy and even the vision therapy he needed to it, there would have been benefits had our situation been a little different. So we did see benefits, like small improvements from that. I had mentioned that we had found meditation. And that was really helpful as long as he was meditating every day. He was feeling more clarity, a little more clear, a little less angry and moody, things like that, as long as he kept up with that. But we were later, at some point, I don't remember how long after his concussion, but we were introduced to Sherrick Peck. And he is the inventor of the Resimax tuner. So it's this really, have you heard of it?
I have heard of it. I think they use it at the clinic I work at.
Oh, how cool. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's a device that stimulates the vagus nerve. And once my husband started using that, it was really the first time that we saw any significant improvement. So that was like the biggest help that we noticed. And then really, other than that, it was years and years later that I became certified as a life coach, which helped me. It was so helpful for me as a caregiver because I was able to shift my mindset around everything that had happened. And more importantly, shift my mindset around my relationship with my husband. And then I found the amazing Leah Davidson, and I took her advanced training in nervous system resilience. That has been a huge game changer in our lives because it's helped me gain this in-depth knowledge of how the nervous system works and how to get it regulated again, because that's really, concussions create dysregulation in the nervous system. And so it's taught me how to re-regulate the nervous system. And so I've used all of the tools on myself, and I'm still feeding tools to my husband, and we're using that for him. And with all of that, we're seeing, once again, like, improvement in him. I thought it would be impossible. I had decided he was as good as he was ever going to get, that our life was kind of stagnant, that it was never going to change. But these tools have started making big changes in his life. And he's got good things happening for him right now. And he's like continuing to improve. And some of these lingering challenges that he's experiencing are starting to improve. And so after 7 years, here we are, we're still seeing improvement. And I think bigger leaps of improvement than we've seen in a really long time.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. I'm so happy to hear that. So happy to hear that. And still really want to get him into cognitive effects. Just throwing that out there.
One day.
Yes. But I love that there are tools and there are things that you're finding. And just this message again of like, don't give up hope, keep looking. There's going to be something out there. Yeah. And the nervous system stuff really does make a difference because the regulation happens. So where do you feel like you're at in your journey as a caregiver at this point? Are you, and where is your husband now on his concussion journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really am a completely different person than I was before both of their concussions. I feel like I'm more compassionate, more understanding, more forgiving. I am willing to feel deep. I wasn't before. I pushed it all away. I've gained a lot of empathy for anyone else who's a caregiver and the roles that they play. And my husband is doing amazingly well. He has a few lingering symptoms, but he's still continuing to improve. The concussion has had one really unique side effect, and that is that he is way more artistic and creative than ever before.
Interesting.
He's always been really creative and always been an artist, but the concussion brought this out in him and this passion to create. And it's just really enhanced his abilities like tenfold. It's been crazy.
That's so cool.
Right after the concussion, like he started painting and drawing and chalking and all these new things that he had never tried before and just doing amazing work. And within the last 2 years, he's actually taken over part of our LLC and he's doing graphic design and building websites. And he's learned all of that with a concussion.
Wow.
So he really is just thriving and doing amazing work for his clients, for himself, for our family. And I really believe that without the changes of the concussion, he wouldn't be where he's at today in that. And that, Bethany, is where the hope in our story really comes in. Because it's been 7 years, and the first 5, I thought my life was as good as it was going to get. But I am so happy to say that I was wrong. Because things are getting better and better, and we're both better because of the struggles that we've gone through. I'm a better wife and mother and life coach and mentor, and he's a better artist and designer and husband and father. Like, we are learning and thriving through all of the struggles that we've gone through.
Do you feel like the relationship with the kids has changed as well?
Definitely. So him and my son were really close before the concussion and before my husband's concussion. And then it kind of distanced them because, a teenage boy and an angry father don't really mix together. Yeah. And they have such a better relationship now than they've had in a long time. Like, they spend a lot of time together, and it's been really heartwarming to see that healing and that progress taking place.
That's a beautiful thing. And everybody's situation is going to be different. Everybody's response to a concussion and like all of the things, it's different. But what kept you in the marriage? I think there are sometimes people decide not to continue that, especially since it was so good. And then it was so hard and he was so different. It's not the same person. How did you decide to continue that? And how have you guys grown from the sticking together?
I think it had to be a decision made over and over again. I had to keep deciding to stay. I had to keep deciding that we were worth it. And I had to change to conform to the new relationship that we had, because I had to kind of mourn the loss of what we had, because we had it and then it was taken away. And so I had to mourn like the loss of him, of who he used to be. And I had to choose him over and over and over again. And a lot of like our faith definitely helped keep me with him and want to stay with him and our kids. But it was really just that conscious choice of choosing him, regardless of where we were at or where he was at, just knowing that that's what I wanted. I wanted to still be with him.
That's a beautiful thing. And do you feel like your relationship has improved now? It sounds like things are good. So
yes, absolutely. So we still have our struggles just like everybody else, but definitely our relationship is significantly better than I thought that it could have ever become. After so many years of just discouragement, I didn't think it would ever get better. And I am so happy that it's better than I could have ever imagined after going through all of this.
Wow, that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And for sharing everything. This has been so helpful. And is there anything else that you want our audience to know about your experience or this as a support person for a spouse or a son or a child with concussions?
I think, like, for me, my faith was a huge part of this. And my big message would be like, God is so mindful of each and every one of us. My family's concussion journey was supposed to be long, filled with many life lessons, a journey of self-discovery, healing, and helping others. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm so grateful that this was part of our story, because I really like who I have become through all of this. I don't like who I was early on, but I love who I've become, and I love who my husband is today. So my message would really just be like, trust that God is mindful of you today and your loved one and where you're at and where you are going.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I like got chills. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And if people want to hear more from you, where can they go? I know you have a free resource for parents as well on the anxiety side of things. Can you tell us about that and how people can find you?
Yeah. So I am on Facebook and Instagram at Cory Hardman Coaching, and Cory is Cory. I also have a website that's coryhardmancoaching.com. My free resource is an anxiety guide called 21 Signs Your Teen Has Anxiety and Needs Additional Support. It's a great resource for anyone wondering if their teen has anxiety, or maybe they already know that they have anxiety, but they're wondering if it's time to get them extra support or not. And I know it says teen, but really it can be applied to anyone experiencing anxiety, which makes it a great resource for caregivers, because we know concussions create a lot of anxiety. And most people with anxiety don't talk about it, especially in the beginning. We just start to notice the symptoms. So this resource is a great guide to be able to see if the symptoms line up with what you're seeing in your loved one and kind of if they need some extra support. And that can be accessed by going to my website at coryhardmancoaching.com. If you do /anxiety, it will take you directly to the sign up page, or you can sign up at the bottom of any page on my website.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll definitely be linking the ways to contact Cory in the show notes, so people can find that there too. So thank you so much. This has been I really appreciate this very vulnerable, very open conversation. And I think it will be really helpful for people. And I would definitely, encourage people to look up your website, find that information, because the anxiety piece is definitely a thing that happens with concussions that isn't always mentioned. And so that's really helpful. And I just, really appreciate you sharing everything today. Thank you so much for being
here. You're
here.
welcome.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.